Hi everyone, welcome to the videos. These two videos that will be uploaded to Google Classroom are your two lessons for this week. Just briefly, before I jump straight into the content and the purpose of the videos, the work that's been submitted last week was really good. I've had some positive comments on the videos, so this will be something that I'll continue to do as we move forward into next year when we're back together as a class. Just on that note, these two videos that I am posting today will be the last two this side of May and for the foreseeable. As things progress and we move towards summer, we need to start to look at coursework, which is something that I think mentioned in the last video. So just to kind of keep that in mind, we will be varying things. Things will be taking a little bit of a different format, particularly with coursework. But yeah, just in sum, these two final videos will be the last for a while, but they seem to have worked really well, so it'll be something that I'll continue to do when we're back together post-lockdown. Okay, so as the title suggests, this week the two video lessons is all about ideology, and that's ideology as a critical framework in which to study and analyse the films on specification. This video will be all about laying out the kind of foundations and the groundwork about how we can approach and look at ideology. I'll be making reference to some of the films that we've already looked at on specification. Video 2 will be a more in-depth analysis in relation to Captain Fantastic and No Country for Old Men. Okay, so if we take it back, as always, when we start with something new, how does this relate to the exam? Well, the first thing we need to know is that ideology is a specialist area for 4 films on specification. These films are as follows: No Country for Old Men and Captain Fantastic, which, as we know, fall under the American Cinema since 2005 section. And finally, British Cinema since 1995, Under the Skin, and We Need to Talk About Kevin. 2 films that we haven't studied yet as a class, but which are central to ideology and its specialist area. So if we start from the beginning and really break this word down, what we need to know is that ideology is simply just a posh word for ideas, systems of belief, attitudes and values within a film. So to give that point a little bit of weight and to kind of pad this out when we're talking about ideology and how we can approach it as film studies students, one useful way in which to kind of think about it and bring it together is to consider that ideology can be thought of as the main messages and values conveyed by a film, as well as those which inform it. So if we kind of take that back a bit, the 2 starter questions that will relate to the lesson tasks that I'm setting you alongside this video, and it's these 2 kind of like questions that you should be asking yourself when we're studying and looking at ideology within a film. And that is simply, what are the main messages and values of the film? How are these messages conveyed through the use of key elements of film form? Those 2 starter questions, those 2 ways in which to interact with ideology, are really useful as a starting point. So if you keep those 2 questions in mind, you won't go wrong. Just simply messages and values. What are the strong, kind of clear, coherent ones that appear within a film? How are they shown through elements of film form? It's important not to kind of get caught up with terminology or sort of lost with ideology. It's really a sort of simple concept that can be broken down into those 2 areas, certainly as we kind of get familiar with it as a specialist area. So with that in mind, what I'm going to do is use Pan's Labyrinth, a film that we're really familiar with, the first film that we looked at together as 2 classes, as a case study to kind of consider how we can apply ideological analysis, how we can identify the key themes, and how film form is used to show us this. Just remember, folks, a little bit of a sort of off-key rant here, if you will, but always remember that all theories that we learn, even though Pan's Labyrinth doesn't ask you about ideology, it's all about film form and creating meaning and response. It's really useful to be able to apply any theory that we learn to any of the films on specification. That's something that I've kind of like enforced since we since we started to look at theory, and is really the difference between a C and a B grade. So with this in mind, this is good revision, but it's also a way in which we can engage with a film that we're familiar with to consider how ideological analysis works with regards to those two starter questions, to kind of get us thinking about how we can use ideology to analyse films. Okay then, so Pan's Labyrinth and ideological analysis. Just briefly, as you'll see when I get to my point on ideology, a quick recap on historical context around the film. We know that Pan's Labyrinth, when we're introduced to Ophelia, her mum and Captain Vidal, is set in 1944. The Spanish Civil War has ended 5 years ago in 1939, and this was a fight against the left-wing coalition of the Republicans, who are embodied by the likes of Mercedes and the guerrillas who fight in the forest, against the right-wing fascist forces, the Nationalists, who are led by Captain Vidal and who are sort of like overseen by General Franco. So we know that the film starts in 1944, and by this point the Nationalists have consolidated victory, and they've really started to put repressive and fascist dictatorship policies in place on the people of Spain, and it's really quite a negative representation of the Nationalists, and it's that I'm going to really kind of talk about in relation to our two starter questions on ideological analysis. What are the key themes that run throughout Pan's Labyrinth, and how are they shown within film form? And it's going to be this focus on how the film is negative in its representation and ideas about the Nationalists. Okay then, so one key thing that I would argue that is really kind of dominates certainly the first half of Pan's Labyrinth is this suggestion that the Nationalists are omnipresent, that they're always there in some shape or form, whether that's in Ophelia's life or perhaps within the frame of a shot, in the barn, wherever within the diegesis or the film world, the Nationalists are generally always there. One thing that we did talk about, if I remember, was this kind of like dark, low-key blue lighting, which we said was perhaps a metaphor for them, taking over Spain, and this kind of negative, lifeless tone that they've brought with their reign. But certainly this omnipresent kind of status where, they're always there, and it's really a metaphor for their kind of repressive regime and how they dictated and took over Spain. So, to move on to that second starter question, how is this theme, how is this idea that Del Toro puts into the film evident within Pan's Labyrinth? How is it used to show us through different elements of film form? Well, certainly what I've done is I've picked out one key still, or one shot from the film, and it's just before the battle sequence takes place between the guerrillas and the Nationalists. And I think this shot that should be on screen really kind of enforces that sort of omnipresent representation and theme of the Nationalists. If we look at kind of how space in particular is used, we can see that they take over the frame, they take over the forefront of the frame, they take over the background. We've got that wide frame shot that shows that there's a lot of them there, that enforces this numerical superiority that they have against the Republicans. We can also say that through the use of mise-en-scène, the costume and the colour, this kind of like darkish bluish greenish, all of the soldiers are wearing this, which kind of signifies this homogeneous kind of robotic mechanic, all similar regiment. So there's no kind of like celebration of identity, there's no space for difference in Spain. There's this kind of like homogeneous mass blob of soldiers that have just kind of engulfed and taken over Spain. That's further stretched if you can see the van as well. Again, that's the sort of same colour. So we've got real kind of like key colour codes here that are kind of giving us this, the sort of visually storytelling. They're telling us that, these all belong together. This one colour is used to kind of represent the Nationalists as being, kind of all the same. And a real kind of repressive force within Spain, which is, certainly enforced through the use of space and colour. Okay, so to sum up the lesson and to briefly explain your task, as well as just to cover a few other little things that I want to go over in relation to the future as we move forward. What we've done there is we've really just scratched the tip, sort of the surface of ideological analysis. We've looked at those two key starter questions: what themes, ideas are prevalent in a film, how are they shown to us through film form. Those are the two key starter questions which relate to your task, which should be attached with this video. What I'd like you to do, taking on board what I've done with Pan's Labyrinth in this video, is have a think yourself. What are the key themes, ideologies and values are prevalent within the film? Then on the other side of the sheet, can you think of specific film form examples that support this and that show this? And that should really kind of bring together those two key starter questions before we move on to kind of a more sophisticated analysis and discussion of ideology, where we'll look at political approaches, feminist approaches. We'll consider whose ideologies we should be analysing, whether that's the director's or an audience's response. These are things that we'll do when we're back together as a class, very content heavy, and it would just be easier to do this together. But you know, what we've done there is a nice kind of introduction. The video tomorrow will be a lot more specific to Captain Fantastic and No Country for Old Men, just to tie things in a bow nicely before we move on. Just again, folks, it's worth repeating with reference to Pan's Labyrinth, even though you won't be asked about ideology in the exam on Pan's, just being able to apply ideology to any film that we've studied is excellent. Remember, I said it's that key between the C and the B. So if once you've got the ideological analysis approach under your belt, you know, you're going to be really flying. With reference to the second video, what I'm also going to do as a means to kind of tie a knot in Captain Fantastic and No Country for Old Men is include a slide on just a few other key points on spectatorship theory. We're not going to go back into it because we've done too much, well, not too much, but we've done it to death. But there's some key points that me and Christine have, what Christine kind of identified when she watched this video, and I'm going to put them in a PowerPoint, and it's important that you take them down. They're just a few key points on spectatorship that I missed off in the videos that, you know, she feels that you need to know. So that will be attached with lesson 2. Just briefly, lesson 2, as I said, will be a more in-depth approach to ideology in relation to Captain Fantastic and No Country. And then we're really going to start to move on to coursework, which we will address in the coming weeks, as well as your FA and your graded task, which we will be doing next week. But all will be revealed about that next week. So as always, any questions, please just get in touch. Hope everyone's keeping safe, and well done if you've made it all the way through this video as always.